Alright, I wanted to provide a synopsis for the CSM minutes and the Eve Vegas presentations. I tried sticking to the things that I thought were the most interesting or would affect the most people, but the length of this video still managed to get away from me. So, I am going to break this up into 2 or 3 videos, but I've already done most of the legwork, so expect the rest of the series to follow shortly. In case you haven't already guessed by now, I am going to drone on for a really long time. So, before I lose anyone, I want to mention a few things. First, vote in your CSM elections. They can influence what CCP works on and how they change it. Second, file bug reports. This really helps CCP to figure out the causes of problems and may even alert them to new ones. Third, check out the Little Things thread where you can make suggestions. You can vote by liking other players' posts or add your own. Speaking of which, the links for everything will be listed down below. Also, one of the things brought up in the minutes and at Eve Vegas was the high SP and IS requirements for running abyssal sites. And while that may hold true for the upper tiers, it doesn't for the lower ones. In truth, the barrier to entry is actually much lower than it is perceived to be. Eventually, I might do a whole video series on abyssal space, but in the meantime, I've chosen to use abyssal site videos as filler content while I talk. I'll start by running comm filaments with T1 cruisers, T2 fits, no implants, and no drugs. The character I'll be using does have really good skills, but hopefully it demonstrates that you don't need 80 million SP and billion IS fits to go abyss diving. Alright, let's get started. Obviously, different CSM members have different priorities, but apparently they all agree on these issues. I will cover this stuff in the appropriate sections, but I wanted to point out that these things will be more likely to be addressed by CCP due to the CSM's unanimity. And of course, as we saw from Eve Vegas, war decks are indeed being reworked. The idea of a new basic overview was tossed around. Apparently you can't even finish the MPE without adjusting your settings, so that speaks to just how bad it actually is. Regardless, a better basic overview would be nice, but people will still want different settings for different activities. Thus, I wish there were better ways to share them. Anyway, I'm going to throw up a link to a general overview that I made. Unfortunately, you can only have 8 tabs, so I couldn't create one for every possible use, but it's definitely a huge improvement over the default settings. As stated previously, players perceive the difficulty and cost of getting started in abyssal space to be higher than it actually is. However, players who do participate show a sharp uptick in several important player metrics. CCP didn't specify what those metrics were, but they do consider these players to be healthier customers. Regardless, it really sounds like they want to increase player participation in abyssal space because of this. The first confirmed change will be the ability to run abyssal sites with 3-man frigate teams. Everything is supposed to work the same, save that it requires 3 filaments and the rewards are tripled. So hopefully this lowers the barrier to entry even further and encourages people to fleet up. The second change will be a new secure cache area, which is accessible from multiple dead space filaments. The cache takes time to open, the exit gate only opens when the cache does, and other players may show up while you wait. Rise said, and I quote, 2 will enter, 1 will leave, but he didn't specifically say that the exit would only work for 1 person. Obviously, people can and will fight in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that only 1 person will make it out alive. And honestly, I would prefer if that were the case, as I think it would be crappy to not have the choice on whether or not to engage anyone else that shows up. I mean, everywhere else in Eve, from roams to faction warfare, you can make informed decisions on whether or not to engage, and you can use skill and expertise to de-aggress when things start going south, or to just avoid bad matchups entirely. If audience cheers were any indication, they seem to disagree with me, but I don't like the idea of blindly committing to potentially unfavorable matchups just by taking the gate. Also, I hope that only abyssal sites of the same tier will be linked, or else you'd end up with low-skill new bros getting stomped by veteran pilots with blinged outfits. Anyway, both these changes will be coming in the November patch and are already on the test server. We also have some new Triglavian ships coming out. The destroyer is designed to be a long-range skirmisher, and the battlecruiser is pretty much what you'd expect for a ship of its race and size. Both these ships will be coming out November 13th. We're also going to be getting T1 and T2 Triglavian Logi ships, but they aren't far enough along for CCP to share any hard numbers with us. However, we do know that their repping power will increase the longer they are repping the same target. Thus, It's speculated that they'll be used to protect critical roles such as FCs and boosters, or to protect vulnerable ships and gate camps. We're also getting new mutaplasmids for entropic disintegrators and damage mods. And take a look at these ranges. So, with good ranges and only having to worry about 2 or 3 attributes on the damage mods, the probability of getting all good rolls is looking pretty good. For simplicity's sake, let's assume a 50% chance of a good roll on each stat. On DDAs, we'd have a 25% chance of both stats being in the green. For the other damage mods, we'd have a 12.5% chance of all 3 stats being in the green. Obviously, the actual probability will be a little to a lot lower depending on the mutaplasmid you use, but it is looking like all green abyssal damage mods will be relatively common. Finally, material drops are going to be increased in order to help drive down the cost of Triglavian ships. In fact, Abyssal Space now spawns Triglavian drilling platforms, which can be destroyed in looting, assuming you have the time. We do also have some other changes which have been discussed by the CSM. They include the timer for the site stopping as soon as the last gate has been activated, mutaplasmids for ships, which I can certainly dig, and possibly doing something with modules that have had bad rolls, such as allowing them to be reprocessed for some sort of residue or currency. How that would work out is still in the air, but CCP is aware that the current situation doesn't feel all that great for players. Okay, CCP Rise talked about last year's changes in his ship imbalance lecture, but I'm only going to go through some of the more recent ones. So if you're interested in things like how changes have impacted usage, be sure to check out the first part of his lecture. The first part of the ECM change has already hit TQ and has given players the ability to always lock the ship that is jamming them. This was done because the mechanic feels so crappy to a lot of players. They hate being jammed out, and it feels like there is no counter and that there's nothing they can do but try to live until a missed jam cycle. I did read a comment on a forum about the changes saying that there were counters, it's just that people forget to fit them, and he does make a fair point. There are local and remote sensor boosters, auto-target missiles, drones, sharpshooter mode on tactical destroyers, sensor compensation skills, and knowing when and how to engage or disengage. That being said, it's still a mechanic that feels really crappy for a lot of people, and that includes ECM pilots, who often seem to focus on their missed jams. I know it may seem counterintuitive for a mechanic to feel bad for both sides, but Extra Credits has at least 2 videos that help explain what's going on. The first discusses how we interpret chance and how bad rolls can feel wrong even when things are working as they should be. The second discusses Portnow's postulate, or how player frustration with RNG is equal to the chance of a bad roll multiplied by the time lost. Not to mention, there are a few psychological concepts which probably play a role as well. Negativity bias is the idea that negative events have a greater effect on our psychological state than positive events of equal intensity, and loss aversion is the idea that we hate losses more than we love equivalently sized gains. So when examining ECM with all this in mind, it's easy to see how Eve's full loot death mechanic and ship cost can greatly amplify player frustration. So valid counters or not, ECM still feels crappy for everyone involved. And yes, from a player's perspective, get good is exactly what serious players should be doing. They should be learning how to use and defend against the game's various mechanics and not waiting for CCP to change things to their liking. From a design perspective, however, it needed to be fixed. So, allowing ships to always be able to target their jammer should go a long way towards making the mechanic feel less crappy for the target. The problem with this, however, is that ECM is even more underpowered. Fortunately, CCP is aware of this and is planning on giving quite a few buffs to ECM pilots. Of course, the ECM strength bonus will help increase efficacy, but without the ability to completely jam dangerous ships and fighters, survivability will be a much bigger concern. The optimal range bonus will make it a lot easier for the Griffin to get outside of drone control range and help everyone pull more range on snipers. The SIG radius reduction should also help a little bit, but I'm not so sure that it'll be enough for the frigs. Both already have fat base SIGs, are almost always fit with MWDs, and are quite squishy. Finally, there really isn't anything here to address the threat fighters pose. Some people have asked for the new mechanic not to apply to fighters, but I'm not so sure that's going to happen. In short, the bonuses should help, but I'm not so sure that they're going to be enough. But there will undoubtedly be some slides about it at the next FanFest, so We'll see. Oh, and solo PvP in ECM ships is now a thing of the past. So, yeah. Okay. The tinfoil hatters say that the CSM wanted nullification removed from interceptors in order to specifically address the Fuzzy Claw doctrine, which is a hunting technique based on groups of nullified interceptors doing fast hit and run tactics. Moreover, the very popular Claw doctrines were even mentioned in the dev blog. I know Brisk Rubal said that his priority was in Tosis defense, but after spending at least 2 hours reading about it, I couldn't find any arguments by anyone actually supporting this idea. The whole conversation seemed to be one side saying that they just want to make Eve safe for ratters, and the other side saying that's not true, believe me. So if anyone wants to set me straight by providing a more detailed explanation, feel free to do so in the comments down below. In the meantime, hand me my tinfoil because I'm going to argue as if the change was designed to address the Fuzzy Claw doctrine. So, the dev blog, CSM members, and a few other players have stated that there is no clear counter to the Fuzzy Claw doctrine. But that's just not true because the clear counter is not being AFK or semi-AFK, being on voice comms, and monitoring intel channels. You'd be amazed at how far that goes towards keeping you alive, especially if you live several jumps deep into your intel network. Past that, options include smart bombs, faxes, fast locking, and insta-locking ships. So, there's plenty of ways to keep your PvE ship safe, they just require attention and effort, as it should be. And it's straight garbage that hunting tactics have been nerfed in order to make it safer for the lazy and inattentive. Whatever. The short and skinny is that nullification was removed from combat interceptors in the October patch. However, because CCP saw increased roaming activity after they had first given nullification to interceptors, they decided against completely removing it. Thus, fleet interceptors have retained the ability. And what does this mean for the meta? Well, I'm sure there'll be some slides devoted to usage changes at the next FanFest, but an overnight price drop of about 33% for combat interceptors seems to indicate that people have moved on. Thus, they'll probably need some sort of a buff to get them back to where they need to be. Before October's balance pass, it used to be possible for Hicks to achieve ludicrous speeds and perfect agility with a specific combination of modules. It was the mass reduction of warp disruption field generators that played a critical role in getting this trick to work, so CCP removed it. The problem with that is that the mass reduction also made it a useful tool for rolling wormholes. First, wormholers would use warp disruption field generators in order to minimize the chance of collapsing the wormhole, and then on the return trip, use a microwarp drive to maximize the chance. Basically, it helped them make sure that they were safely back home when the wormhole collapsed and not stranded dozens of jumps away. Naturally, wormholers aren't happy. Not only do they not like the change, but they're also pissed because CCP seems to keep doing things that negatively impact them. Anyway, I remember hearing somewhere that CCP was aware of the problem and that they were looking to make a specific mod for that purpose. The matter is extremely complicated, however, because mods that affect mass could be abused to help ships zip around the grid or align out super fast. Personally, I think that they should make a dedicated rolling ship. It might require more upfront work, but it should also make it easier to avoid unexpected problems. And I don't think it's an unreasonable request either, because they did recently release a ship designed solely for FCs. But whatever route they take, they need to do it soon because the wormholers aren't happy. Oh, and check out Bill McDonough's article on the subject if you want to know more details about all this. Alright. Chain boosting is the technique of using multiple command destroyers fitted with micro-jump drives to jump fleet members around the battlefield. It is extremely difficult to catch and is used to evade enemy fleets. However, it also becomes more and more difficult to execute as the number of jumps increases. CCP wants to somehow change it so that it becomes even more difficult to perform dozens of jumps while leaving it easy to make one or two. Steve Ronukin suggested that heat damage be applied whenever the module is used, but with enough command destroyers, players would still have plenty of time to repair the heat damage before needing to MJD again. CCP Rise preferred a timer, which I think I could work well as long as it doesn't increase the server load too much. Oh, and the micro jump drive operation skill would probably need to be tweaked as well. The Ferox was brought up as being OP. They didn't really discuss any changes, only that they would like to see them toned down a bit. I'd imagine that it would be damage projection that got tweaked, however. So this is interesting. The metrics show that a lot of the Navy ships aren't seeing much use, but rather than going in and tweaking individual ships, CCP is looking at doing a broader rework. One thing that he specifically mentioned was standings, which could entail standings affecting the performance of Navy ships much the same way that sex status affects the Concorde lineup. On one hand, this would make standings more valuable, which is kind of cool because they've lost a lot of their value over the years. But on the other, who likes grounded standings? Overall, I think I like the idea. It will give extra value to mission running, which is one of those activities that the game likes to push new bros into. However, I do have a few concerns. First, new players are still unknowingly trashing their standings with other empires and sometimes getting blapped by faction police because of it. So, regardless of any changes to the Navy ships, I would like to see a warning added to missions which require killing ships of another empire. Second, the Vexor Navy issue is a huge stepping stone for new bros, and I don't want to see that lost. Yeah, people keep bringing up AFK cloaky campers to CCP, and they keep saying that they've been thinking about it, but then nothing ever happened, so I don't know what the hang-up is. Yeah, and you'd think they would have addressed this problem long ago, because it can't be good for player activity levels. Anyway, there was one little sentence mentioning cloaks requiring fuel in the CSM, so yay for that. Personally, I like the idea of cloaks having a long cycle time and no auto-repeat. Long cycle times mean that people could still stalk prey and have bios and smoke breaks and whatnot, but no one would be able to AFK cloak a camp while at work or asleep. Moreover, not needing fuel would mean explorers wouldn't lose cargo space, and wormholers wouldn't have extra logistic concerns. Of course, I would strongly suggest running any possible changes by the wormholers first, because they'll probably riot if CCP messes that up for them too. Okay, caps really aren't my area of expertise, and this video is already turning into a monster, thus I'm going to gloss over some of this stuff. First, Sort Dragon, Brisk Grubal, and Kill a Bee apparently had a list of issues developed by FCs that they wanted to see addressed. They didn't go into a lot of detail, but the short of it is that caps are OP. Second, it was confirmed that the damage cap to fighters was intended. Third, CCP was made aware of a bug that allowed Titans to tether 1 minute after making a kill with the Doomsday. Alright, let's talk Rorquals. So, I used to know a guy who would respond to calls for help with his Rorq. Didn't seem to matter to him what was on grid. So, I don't know, maybe the Rorq is a Scotch OP? Anyway, Fitz rocking 3 capital ancillary shield boosters seem to be nigh unkillable, so CCP is considering making them have a 1 mod per ship limit. They're also considering applying the same limit to subcap ASBs, but trying to give them a bit of a buff so that it doesn't mess with the meta too much. Regardless, I suppose something needs to be done about the Rorqual, risk versus reward and all that. However, another thing brought up was that Rorq pilots can put their expensive excavator drones into the W2 mobile depot, which has a reinforcement timer. So, even if they do lose the Rorq, they can usually recover their drones. Sort suggests dropping the capacity of the W2 to only hold 2 or 3, but that would give it less storage space than a regular mobile depot and make it rather worthless. Of course, there are other ways you could restrict the drones from being put into a depot, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure that the mechanics should be changed. It's smart, and it requires attentiveness and effort. After all, excavator drones still show up on Rorqual kill boards, and if you search for bushing excavators, you can find videos of people stealing them. So sure, give the Rorqs a balance pass so that they're not ridiculously hard to kill. But I think nerfing WeDo insurance for the benefit of kill boards and loot drops for whalers is a bit overkill. So, the problem with faxes is that they're hard to kill, and they make it a chore to kill anything that is being repped by them. CCP's first set of proposed changes wasn't met very well by the community, and so they went back to the drawing board. I think I heard somewhere someone say that you know Eve is balanced right when half your players say that you went too far, and the other half say you didn't go far enough. So, I don't know enough to say for certain, but based upon the community response, it seems like version 2 got a lot closer to hitting the mark. CCP Rise didn't get into the details, but he did say that they were looking to keep improving their metrics so that they can better understand problems and implement fixes. So hopefully that helps with their speed and accuracy. Of course, I think it would be cool if they would share all that stuff with us, just like they do with the monthly economic report. I mean, I make my own graphs, so that kind of stuff gives me a nerd boner. Finally, Rise mentioned that they're still working on tier side. For those that don't know, it's a rework of the meta modules. So it used to be that all modules had meta levels 1 through 4, with each level representing an increase in power. Of course, this system presented a false choice because everyone flocked to the meta 4 modules. So CCP decided to give specific roles to the meta modules, such as Restrained, Enduring, Scoped, and Compact. As you probably noticed, ships in a lot of the modules have already been done, but they still have a ways to go. I'm not sure what's taking them so long, but hopefully they make some progress. Speaking of which, it used to be that each sensor type had its own specific electronic countermeasure modules. Terraside saw them merged into the universal sensor boosters and signal amplifiers we see today. Call me crazy, but would it be a terrible idea to merge the ECM modules as well? It wouldn't directly help with survivability, but it would help offset the nerf, eliminate the need for rainbow fits, and help ease new bros into the role. Moreover, you'd greatly reduce the number of ECM modules in the game and even allow for the sensor compensation skills to be merged. I am kind of weird in how much I like complexity, but that's one simplification that I wouldn't mind seeing. Alright, I think I'm going to stop here. My next goal is to have the next part up in 2 days. Don't forget to support all your favorite content creators, and until next time, fly smart.